I need you to understand something before I tell you any of this. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a whistleblower. I'm not brave. I'm a 53-year-old man named Earl Potts who pushed a mop cart through the hallways of Meridian BioSciences for 11 years, and I never once asked what was behind any of the doors I wasn't supposed to open. Not once, because asking questions wasn't part of my job. Cleaning was my job. Showing up at 10 p.m., clocking in at the side entrance with my badge, nodding at the security guard, and spending 8 hours making a building look like nobody worked in it. That was my entire purpose. And I was fine with that. I need you to understand that I was fine with it. Because everything that happened, everything I saw and did and failed to do, started the moment I stopped being fine. It was a Wednesday, October 9th. I know the date because it matters now. In 72 hours, the first case would be reported at a hospital 6 miles from the facility. In 96 hours, the governor would declare a state of emergency. In 5 days, the word outbreak would appear on every screen in the country. But on that Wednesday night, none of that existed yet. The world was still normal. I was still nobody. The building itself, I should describe it, because you've probably seen the footage from after, the aerial shots with the military perimeter and the hazmat tents, and you think you know what it looked like. You don't. From the inside, Meridian BioSciences was the most boring place on earth. 4 stories of beige carpet, fluorescent lighting, glass-walled conference rooms, and those motivational posters that nobody reads. The lobby had a waterfall feature that I had to wipe calcium deposits off every Thursday. The break room smelled like burnt microwave popcorn and artificial vanilla creamer. It was an office building that happened to have a biosafety wing on the sublevel. That's how everyone treated it. Even me. Sublevel access was restricted. I knew that. My badge opened the stairwell door to B1, which was storage or old equipment, filing cabinets, broken chairs, the usual graveyard of corporate furniture. B2 was the lab level. My badge didn't work on B2. I'd never tried it more than once, years ago, out of idle curiosity. The door had beeped red, and I'd gone back upstairs and never thought about it again. My routine that night was the same as every night. 4th floor first, working down. Vacuum the executive offices, empty the trash, wipe the kitchen counters, restock the bathroom dispensers. 3rd floor, the open plan research offices, same tasks plus mopping the tile in the corridor that connected to the east wing. 2nd floor, more offices, a small gym that nobody used after 7 p.m., a server room I only entered to empty a single wastebasket by the door. 1st floor, lobby, reception, the big conference room, the visitor bathrooms. I was on the 3rd floor, maybe 90 minutes into my shift, when I saw the light. The east corridor on 3 was a dead zone at night. No reason for anyone to be there. The overhead fluorescents were on a motion timer, and they'd usually gone dark by the time I reached that section. But that night, there was light coming from underneath the stairwell door at the far end, the one that led down to the sublevels. Not the steady white of a fluorescent, something intermittent, a flicker, like a failing bulb cycling on and off. I almost ignored it. I want to be honest about that. My first instinct was to note it in the maintenance log and let the day crew handle it. But there was a sound, too. Faint, a hissing, like air escaping through a gap. I'd heard pipe noises in the building before, but this was different. Rhythmic, almost wet. I walked to the stairwell door. My badge beeped green. This was the B1 access, nothing restricted. I opened the door and looked down the concrete staircase. The light was coming from below. That flicker, pulsing against the gray walls like a heartbeat. The sound was louder here. Not a pipe, not mechanical. Something organic and wrong, like meat being slowly pulled apart. I went down the stairs. I don't know why. 11 years of not asking questions, and on that night I went down the stairs. The B1 storage level was cold. It was always cold, poor insulation, minimal climate control. The kind of space a company maintains just enough to avoid code violations. I knew it well. I came down here once a month to check the mousetraps and make sure nothing was leaking from the old chemical storage cages near the back wall. It was a wide, low-ceiling space divided by rows of industrial shelving, everything coated in a thin film of institutional dust. But the light wasn't coming from B1. It was bleeding up through the floor. I stood at the bottom of the staircase, my mop cart parked behind me on the landing, and I looked at the B2 door. Heavy steel, gray, with a magnetic lock and a card reader that had always shown red for me. There was a small reinforced window in the door, about head height, thick glass with wire mesh inside it. I'd glanced through it a handful of times over the years and seen nothing but another corridor, well lit and clean, disappearing around a corner. Now the corridor behind the glass was dark except for that flicker. An emergency light maybe, or a monitoring system throwing a visual alarm. The hissing sound was clearer here, and there was a smell, faint, chemical, not quite chlorine, not quite ozone. Something in between that hit the back of my throat and made me swallow twice. I pressed my badge to the reader out of reflex, expecting the red beep. The light turned green. The magnetic lock clicked open. I stood there for what must have been 10 seconds, just staring at the green indicator. My badge had never opened this door. It wasn't supposed to open this door. I had a level 1 clearance janitorial access. B2 required level 3 minimum. I knew that because it was printed on the access matrix posted in the security office, a laminated chart I dusted 100 times. Something had changed in the system, or someone had changed it. I should have turned around, called security, called my supervisor, Dennis Gage, who managed the night shift custodial staff from his office on the first floor, where he mostly watched basketball on his phone. I should have done anything other than what I did. I pushed the door open. The B2 corridor was narrow and clinical. White walls, white tile floor, recessed lighting panels in the ceiling. Most of them dark now, just one at the far end cycling on and off with that stuttering flicker. The air was different down here. Heavier, pressurized or filtered or something I couldn't name, and the smell was stronger. I breathed through my mouth and tasted metal. There were doors on both sides, small plaques beside each one. Lab 7, Lab 8, Lab 9, standard issue lab doors with narrow windows and electronic locks. Everything was still and dark behind them. I walked slowly, my sneakers barely making sound on the tile, and I counted Lab 10, Lab 11. Lab 12 was at the end of the corridor, directly beneath the flickering light. Its door was open, not ajar, fully open, pushed flat against the interior wall as if someone had swung it wide and left in a hurry. The card reader beside it was dead, no light at all, and the sound was coming from inside. That wet, rhythmic hissing, louder now, accompanied by a low mechanical hum from somewhere deeper in the room. I stood in the doorway and looked inside, and what I saw is the reason I'm telling you all of this. Lab 12 was small, maybe 20 feet by 20 feet. A biosafety hood along the right wall, workstations with monitors that were all dark, a centrifuge, racks of labeled vials in a refrigerated case with a glass front. Standard laboratory equipment, none of which I could have named at the time. But in the center of the room on a steel examination table, there was a containment unit, a clear acrylic box about 3 feet long, sealed with clamps and connected to a ventilation tube that ran into the wall. The containment unit was cracked. A fracture ran diagonally across the top panel, maybe 8 inches long, and along the fracture line, a dark fluid had seeped out and pooled on the steel table. It was still moving, not dripping moving, creeping across the steel surface with a slow, deliberate viscosity that no liquid I'd ever seen possessed. Like it was searching for the edge, and inside the containment unit, something was pressed against the cracked panel from within. I couldn't see it clearly through the clouded acrylic in the dim light, but it had mass, it had texture. It shifted when I stepped closer, and that wet hissing sound spiked in volume, and I realized it wasn't coming from a pipe or a vent. It was coming from inside the box. I left. I turned around and I walked out of Lab 12 and back down the corridor and through the B2 door, and I didn't run, but only because my legs wouldn't let me. I found Dennis in his office. He was eating sunflower seeds and watching a replay of a Celtics game on his phone, and he looked at me with the expression he always wore when I interrupted him, which was tolerant annoyance. Dennis was 58, 15 years into the job, and he had perfected the art of doing absolutely nothing while appearing to supervise. "Earl, what?" I told him. I told him about the light, the sound, the door opening when it shouldn't have, the cracked containment unit, the fluid moving on the table. I told him about the thing inside the box. I spoke clearly. I wasn't panicking. I'd had to walk back up the stairs to get my breathing under control, and I delivered it calmly, like a report. Dennis listened. He cracked a sunflower seed between his teeth and looked at me for a long time. You went down to B2? The door opened. My badge worked. Your badge doesn't work on B2. I know that, Dennis. It worked tonight. He set his phone down. That was how I knew he was taking it, at least semi-seriously. Dennis never set his phone down. And you saw something in one of the labs. Lab 12, a containment unit, cracked, leaking something, and something alive inside it. Something alive. It moved. When I stepped closer, it moved. He picked up a sunflower seed, examined it, put it back in the bag. Earl, those labs have animals. Mice, rats, whatever. For testing. You probably saw a sample container with a lab rat in it. It wasn't a rat. Did you get a good look at it? I hadn't. I admitted that. The acrylic was clouded, the light was bad, and I hadn't stayed long enough to lean in close. Dennis nodded slowly, the way people nod when they've already decided you're wrong. I'll put it in the log, he said. Day shift can send someone down. Those labs have their own maintenance people. Dennis, the door was open. The containment was breached. Whatever was in that unit was leaking onto the... I'll put it in the log. He said it the same way both times. Same inflection, same finality. Dennis had a talent for making repetition feel like a wall. I stood there. I thought about pushing harder, but the hierarchy was clear and always had been. I reported to Dennis. Dennis reported to the facilities manager, a woman named Sharon Alt, who worked days and whom I'd met exactly twice. Sharon reported to building operations. Building operations reported to someone in corporate I'd never seen. The labs reported to an entirely separate chain research division, headed by people with doctoral titles and security clearances that made my level 1 badge look like a bus pass. I was a janitor standing in a supervisor's office at midnight, telling him that something was wrong in a part of the building I wasn't authorized to access. The power structure answered the question for me. I went back to work. I finished the 3rd floor, moved down to the 2nd, cleaned the gym, emptied the server room wastebasket. I did my job, but the whole time I was aware of what was below me. The sound, the smell, the way that fluid moved across the table, and the thing inside the box shifting when it sensed me near. At 6 a.m., I clocked out. I drove home to my apartment in Glenfield, 14 miles from the facility. I ate a bowl of cereal, took a shower, and sat on my couch in the gray early morning light. And I opened the small spiral notebook I kept in my work bag. I used it mostly for grocery lists and reminders, dentist appointments, oil change dates, my daughter's birthday. But that morning I turned to a fresh page and wrote down everything I'd seen. The time, the location, the details, the smell, Dennis's response. I didn't know why I was doing it. I just felt like someone should write it down. I slept poorly. 3 hours of thin, restless unconsciousness interrupted by a dream I couldn't fully remember, something about a hallway that kept getting longer, a sound I couldn't locate, a door I kept opening onto the same room. I woke up at noon with a headache that felt structural, like the bones of my skull were fitted wrong. My apartment was small, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that opened into a living room with a window that faced the parking lot of a Walgreens. I'd lived there for 6 years since the divorce. It was clean. I was good at cleaning, obviously, but it had the anonymous quality of a space that nobody visited. My daughter Claire was 24 and lived in Portland. We talked on the phone every other Sunday. It was fine. Everything about my life was fine in the way that word means when you've stopped expecting more. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and thought about Lab 12. In the daylight, with traffic sounds coming through the window and the neighbor's dog barking in the corridor, the whole thing felt exaggerated. Dennis was probably right. A lab animal, some spilled reagent, a malfunctioning light. I'd been alone in a dark sub-level at midnight, and my imagination had filled in the gaps. That's what I told myself, but I kept coming back to the door. My badge had opened the B2 door. That was a system fact, not an impression, Not a trick of the dark. Magnetic locks don't malfunction toward more access. They fell closed, not open. Someone had changed my clearance, or the system had been altered, or something about the B2 security had broken in a specific and unusual way. At 4 p.m., before my shift started, I called the facility's help desk. A bored-sounding woman named Janet told me she'd need a ticket number to look into access issues and that I should talk to my supervisor. I called Dennis. He didn't answer. I drove to work. I arrived early, 9:45, 15 minutes before my shift. I parked in the east lot, which was mostly empty at that hour, just a few cars belonging to whatever researchers worked late, and the security guards at vehicles near the front entrance. But that evening, there were more cars than usual. I counted 7 in the row closest to the building, where normally there'd be 2 or 3, and near the service entrance where I clocked in, there was a white van I'd never seen before. No markings, no company logo, just a plain white panel van, backed up to the loading dock with its rear doors closed. I went inside. Gerald, the night security guard, was at his desk. Gerald was 50, quiet, ex-military, and we had the kind of relationship that exists between 2 men who see each other every night and exchange a total of maybe 20 words. He nodded at me. I nodded back. Then I stopped. "Busy tonight?" I asked, gesturing vaguely upward to indicate the building. Gerald glanced at his monitor, which showed the security camera feeds in a rotating grid. "Some people from corporate came in around 6. Still here." "Corporate?" "That's what they badged as." "What floor?" He looked at me with the first real interest I'd ever seen from him. Gerald's default expression was a kind of trained neutrality, the look of a man who'd spent years practicing not reacting. But something shifted. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious." "Don't be." He said it without hostility, almost gently. Then he went back to his monitor. I took my card and started on the 4th floor as usual. The executive offices were empty, but on the desks I noticed something I hadn't seen before. In 3 separate offices, the computer monitors were still on, not the screensaver, but active desktops with email clients open, as if the occupants had stepped away mid-task and hadn't come back. In one office, a coffee mug was still warm. On the 3rd floor, the east corridor lights were on. The overhead fluorescents that were usually dark at this hour were fully illuminated, and the stairwell door to the sub-levels was propped open with a rubber wedge. I could hear voices below. Multiple voices, muffled by distance and concrete, but distinct. Someone laughed a short, hard laugh that didn't sound like amusement. I cleaned the 3rd floor. I did my job, but I moved slower near the east corridor, listening. The voices continued, sometimes rising to the edge of audibility, never quite resolving into words. At one point, I heard what sounded like a power tool, a high-pitched whine that lasted about 30 seconds and then stopped. At midnight, I took my break in the 1st floor kitchen. Dennis was there, which was unusual. Dennis took his breaks in his office. He was standing by the vending machine with his phone in his hand, not looking at it, just holding it. He looked up when I came in. "Earl." "Dennis." Silence then. "About last night. I put it in the log like I said. Sharon got it this morning. And she said it's being handled. Lab maintenance is aware." "That's it?" "That's it. She also said," he paused, cracked his neck. "She said you shouldn't have been down there. Your badge situation is being looked into. Probably a system glitch. IT is going to reset your clearance." "So there was a glitch. I just told you what Sharon told me." "Did she say anything about what I saw? The containment unit? Earl." His voice changed. Not angry, careful. "Sharon said the labs have their own protocols, their own people, their own chain. It's not our department. She asked me to make sure you understood that." I understood it. The message wasn't complicated. Stay in your lane, clean the floors, don't go through doors that aren't yours. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and went back to work. At 2 a.m., I was mopping the 2nd floor corridor near the gym when I heard the elevator. Not the main passenger elevator, which was turned off after hours, but the service elevator at the back of the building, the one used for moving equipment and supplies between floors. It had a distinctive sound, a heavier mechanical groan than the passenger car, and I heard it descending, going down. I stopped mopping. The service elevator went to every floor, including the sublevels. In 11 years, I'd never heard it operate during the night shift. There was no reason for it to run. Deliveries happened during the day. Equipment moves were scheduled through facilities management with at least a week's notice. I walked to the service elevator alcove and stood there, mop in hand, listening. The car descended, stopped. I could hear the doors open somewhere below, a muffled sound, felt more than heard. Then voices again, and a new sound, something heavy being moved across a hard floor, a scraping, dragging rhythm. I waited, 5 minutes, 10. Then the elevator began to ascend. I stepped back from the alcove into the gym doorway, half hidden by the frame. The elevator passed the second floor without stopping and continued up. Third floor. It stopped on 3. I took the stairs. I moved quickly and quietly, something I'd gotten good at over years of cleaning buildings. While people worked late, you learn to be present without being perceived. On the 3rd floor, I came out of the stairwell and looked down the east corridor. 2 men were pushing a steel cart toward the far stairwell door. The cart had wheels, the kind used in labs to move heavy equipment, and it was covered with a black tarp secured with bungee cords. Whatever was underneath was bulky and uneven, about the size of a large dog or a small person curled up. One of the men was wearing a dress shirt and slacks, office clothes, corporate. The other wore a white lab coat. Neither of them was anyone I recognized. The man in the lab coat saw me. He stopped pushing the cart and looked at me across 40 feet of corridor, and his expression was a thing I've thought about every day since. Not surprise, not anger, calculation. He was assessing me, how much I'd seen, how much I mattered, what I might do. He processed this information in about 2 seconds, and then he smiled. "Evening," he said. "Late shift?" "Every night." My voice was steady. I was holding my mop. "Appreciate the hard work." He said it the way you'd talk to a piece of furniture you'd nearly tripped over politely, because the furniture didn't deserve rudeness, but with no real acknowledgement that it existed as anything more than an obstacle. They pushed the cart through the stairwell door and disappeared. I heard them going up, not down. The 4th floor, executive level, then silence. I stood in the corridor for a long time. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, bright and steady, and I could still smell it, at that chemical scent from the night before, faint but present, clinging to the air where the cart had passed. Metal and ozone and something underneath both, something biological and sweet, like fruit on the edge of rot. I went to the stairwell door and tried my badge. Red. They'd already reset my clearance. B1 was locked to me now, and B2 with it. The door that had opened the night before would never open for me again. I went back to my mop cart. I pulled out my spiral notebook. I wrote down the time, the 2 men, the cart, the tarp, the direction they went. I wrote down the smell. Then I finished mopping the 2nd floor and went home. But I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with the notebook open in front of me and the television on low, playing 24-hour news that had nothing to do with anything that mattered. And I thought about what I'd seen under that tarp, the shape, the size, the way it didn't shift or settle when the cart moved. Like whatever it was had stiffened into permanence. I thought about calling someone, but who? The police? And telling them that a janitor saw 2 employees moving something on a cart in a building where things get moved on carts? That I'd smelled something weird in a building full of chemistry labs? That a door had opened for me once and then been locked? I had nothing. I had observations without context, details without framework, a feeling in my gut that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong, and no authority to act on any of it. I picked up my phone and put it down 3 times. The 3rd time I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in 2 years. Ray Nguyen, former Meridian BioSciences employee, former Lab 9 research associate, fired 18 months ago under circumstances I'd only heard about in break room whispers, something about a disagreement with the research director, something about protocols, something about a complaint that went nowhere. Ray and I had never been friends. We'd been friendly. He'd always said hello to me in the hallways, asked about my daughter, treated me like a person instead of a cleaning function. And once, about a month before he was fired, he'd stopped me in the B1 stairwell and said something I'd filed away without understanding it. "Earl, if you ever see anything strange in the labs, don't tell management. Tell someone outside." I'd nodded and forgotten about it. Until now. It was 4:30 in the morning. I called Ray Nguyen. He answered on the 6th ring. His voice was thick with sleep, confused, and when I said my name, there was a long pause. "Earl? Earl Potts? The janitor." "Yes." Another pause. I heard him shifting, sitting up. A lamp clicking on. "It's 4 in the morning." "I know. I'm sorry. I didn't know who else to call." Something in my voice must have communicated what my words hadn't, because when Ray spoke again, the sleep was gone. "What happened?" I told him everything. The cracked containment unit in Lab 12, the fluid that moved, the thing inside the box. My badge opening a door it shouldn't have. Dennis. Sharon's response. The corporate people. The 2 men in the cart. The tarp. My clearance being revoked. Ray didn't interrupt. He didn't ask clarifying questions. He just listened, and when I finished, the silence on the line was so complete I thought the call had dropped. "Ray, I'm here." His voice was different now, controlled in a way that reminded me of Gerald, the security guard that trained stillness, that careful absence of reaction. "Earl, the fluid you saw, the stuff on the table, what color was it?" "Dark, black maybe. It was hard to tell in the light. And it was moving, like it had direction, not just spreading moving." "Did it move toward you?" The question landed in my chest. I hadn't thought about it that way. I replayed the image in my mind, the fluid creeping across the steel table, the slow, purposeful advance. "I don't know, maybe. I wasn't there long enough to—" "Earl, listen to me. I need you to listen carefully." His voice hadn't risen, but it had hardened. "Do not go back to that building. I work there. Call in sick. Quit. I don't care. Do not go back." "Ray, what was in Lab 12? He was quiet again. When he spoke, it sounded like each word cost him something. "I don't know what was in 12 specifically. I was in Lab 9. Different project, different team. But I know what the B2 level was for, and I know what Dr. Andrus Kemp's division was working on, because I saw things I wasn't supposed to see, and when I reported them, I lost my career." "What were they working on?" "I can't explain it on the phone, and I'm not sure I could explain it at all. I'm a molecular biologist, not a virologist, and what Kemp's team was doing went beyond virology into territory that doesn't have a name yet. But I can tell you this, the containment protocols for Lab 12 were rated at BSL-4. Do you know what that means?" I didn't. "It means the highest biosafety level that exists. It's for agents that cause fatal disease with no available treatment. Ebola, Marburg, that level. Whatever was in that containment unit, it was classified at the same threat level as the deadliest pathogens on Earth. And you're telling me the unit was cracked and the contents were on the table." I sat at my kitchen table in my quiet apartment and felt the floor tilt under me. Not physically. The room didn't move. But my understanding of what I'd seen recalibrated itself in an instant. And the magnitude of it, the sheer scale of what a cracked containment unit at BSL-4 might mean pressed down on me like a physical weight. "Who do I call?" I asked. "That's the problem." Ray's voice was almost a whisper now. "Meridian is a Defense Department contractor. Lab 12 is classified. If you call the CDC, they'll refer it to DOD, and DOD will refer it back to Meridian's internal compliance, which is the same chain that already told you to stay in your lane. If you call the press, you'll be violating about 6 federal statutes, and you'll be arrested before the story airs. And if you go back to the building and try to get evidence, my clearance is already revoked. Then they know you saw something, and they're already managing you, the corporate people, the van, the cart with the tarp. That's a cleanup operation. They're removing evidence, transferring materials. Earl, this is what happened when I reported the protocols. They didn't address the problem. They addressed me. So there's nothing I can do." I didn't say that. He was quiet for a moment. "There's a woman, a journalist. Her name is Monica Shin. She covers biotech for an independent outlet, and she's been investigating Meridian for almost a year. She reached out to me after I was fired, and I was too scared to talk to her. I've regretted it every day since. I'll text you her number, call her, tell her everything you told me. She'll know what to do with it. Ray, I could lose my job. The laugh he gave was soft and pained. Earl, your job is the smallest thing you could lose. I didn't call Monica Shin. Not right away. I went to bed, slept 2 hours, woke up, and spent the day in a state of suspension, not quite deciding, not quite refusing to decide, just existing in the space between action and inaction where most of my life had taken place. I cleaned my apartment. I went to the grocery store. I bought chicken thighs and rice and the same brand of hot sauce I'd been buying for 20 years. I came home and cooked dinner and ate it standing at the kitchen counter, looking out the window at the Walgreens parking lot, where a woman was loading bags into her trunk and a teenager was skateboarding between the light poles. And the world was ordinary, relentlessly and beautifully ordinary, and I wanted to stay inside that ordinariness forever. At 8 p.m., I called Claire. She picked up on the third ring, surprised to hear from me on a day that wasn't our scheduled Sunday. Dad, everything okay? Everything's fine. I just wanted to hear your voice. We talked for 12 minutes. She told me about her job at the nonprofit, about the apartment she was looking at with her boyfriend Marcus, about a cooking class she'd signed up for where they were learning to make fresh pasta. She was happy, not euphoric, not performing genuinely, quietly happy in the way I'd always hoped she would be. And I listened, and I said the right things, and I didn't tell her any of it. When we hung up, I sat on the couch and stared at Ray's text message with Monica Shin's number. I stared at it for 45 minutes. Then I put on my work clothes and drove to Meridian. I know what you're thinking. Ray told me not to go back. But here's what Ray didn't understand. If I didn't go to work, that was a signal. If I called in sick for the first time in 11 years, the same week I'd been caught in B2, someone would notice. The safest thing I could do, I told myself, was act normal, be the janitor, push the cart, empty the trash, prove that I was nobody, that I'd seen nothing, that the system had already handled me and I'd stayed handled. That's what I told myself. But there was something else underneath it, and I'm trying to be honest in this notebook, so I'll say it. I needed to go back because I needed to know. The not knowing was worse than the knowing. The not knowing was a sound in the walls of my mind that wouldn't stop, and the only way to make it stop was to see more. The building was different on Friday night. I knew it as soon as I walked in. Gerald was at his desk, but he wasn't alone. A second security guard sat beside him, someone I'd never seen. A younger man with a crew cut and a tactical vest that Gerald had never worn. The new guard watched me badge in without speaking. New hire? I asked Gerald. Contract security, Gerald said. Temporary. What for? Gerald looked at me the way he'd looked at me the night before, with that careful, measuring stillness. Building upgrade, systems check, nothing to worry about. I took my cart to the 4th floor. The executive offices were different too. File cabinets that I'd dusted weekly for years had been emptied. I could tell because the drawers, usually heavy and resistant, slid open with no weight. In the research director's office, the computer was gone entirely, not shut down, removed. Only the monitor cable remained, coiled on the desk like a dead snake. I cleaned the floor. I emptied the remaining trash cans, which contained mostly shredded paper. In one office wastebasket, the shredder had jammed and left several strips, still partially legible. I looked at them without touching them, reading what fragments I could see. Transfer protocol effective October 10th. Level 12 containment reclassified. Specimens to Fort Detrick via Fort Detrick. Even I knew that name. The U.S. Army's Biological Defense Laboratory in Maryland. I knew it the way most people know it, from news stories, from conspiracy theories, from the vague cultural awareness that somewhere in Maryland, the government keeps its most dangerous biological materials. I pulled the jammed strips from the wastebasket and put them in my pocket. It was the first deliberate act of defiance in my 53 years of rule following, and my hands shook so badly I could barely grip the paper. On the 3rd floor, the east corridor was sealed, not just locked, physically sealed. Someone had installed a temporary barrier across the corridor entrance, floor to ceiling, made of heavy plastic sheeting and duct tape to the walls and floor. Behind the sheeting, I could see the corridor lights were on, and shadows moved people, At least 3, walking back and forth with the purposeful rhythm of a team working to a deadline. I cleaned around it. I didn't approach. I didn't ask. I did my job. At midnight, I went to the first floor kitchen for my break. Dennis wasn't there. I called his cell. No answer. I called the supervisor office line. No answer. I walked to his office. The door was locked and the lights were off. Dennis had never missed a shift in the years I'd known him. I ate my sandwich alone in the kitchen, chewing without tasting, and I thought about the shredded paper in my pocket. Fort Detrick, transfer protocol, level 12 containment reclassified. The words assembled themselves into a narrative I didn't want to believe. Whatever was in Lab 12 was being moved. Not fixed, not contained, not reported moved. Transported to a military installation. The cracked containment unit, the leaking fluid, the thing inside the box, someone had decided that the response to a breach wasn't decontamination, but relocation. Unless they'd already determined that decontamination was impossible. At 1:15 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Earl Potts, this is Monica Shin. Ray gave me your number. I understand you have information about Meridian BioSciences. I've been investigating that company for 11 months. Can we talk? I stared at the message. My thumb hovered over the reply button. In the silence of the first floor kitchen, I could hear the building's ventilation system cycling, and underneath it, faintly from somewhere below, a sound that might have been machinery, or might have been something else entirely. A pulse, a rhythm, a breath. I typed, not on the phone, I have documents, paper, need to meet in person. Her reply came in seconds. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., Brightside Diner on Route 14. I'll be in the back booth. I deleted the messages, then I deleted them from my recently deleted folder. Then I cleared Ray's text with her number. Then I put the phone in my pocket and finished my sandwich and went back to work. On the second floor, something had changed that I almost missed. The server room door, which I opened every night to empty the single wastebasket just inside the entrance, was warm to the touch. Not hot warm, notably warmer than the surrounding wall. I pressed my palm flat against the metal surface and felt a vibration, a low, steady thrum that I'd never noticed before. The servers inside were running hard, processing something massive, or transmitting something continuously, or both. I opened the door. The room was the same as always, rows of black server cabinets, blinking lights, the constant white noise hum of cooling fans. But the wastebasket was gone. In its place on the floor just inside the door was a small yellow placard on a folding stand. The kind you see in hallways when a floor is wet. Except this one didn't say, "Caution, wet floor." It said, "Restricted access, authorized personnel only." The wastebasket had been my only reason to enter this room for 11 years. Someone had removed it. Someone had put up a sign. Someone was, piece by piece, shrinking the boundaries of my world inside this building, closing doors, sealing corridors, erasing the small ordinary reasons I had to be in places where I might see things. I closed the door. I went to the lobby. I dusted the waterfall features calcium deposits because it was Thursday night, bleeding into Friday morning, and that was when I did it. I wiped the reception desk. I cleaned the visitor bathrooms. And at 6 a.m., I clocked out, and I drove not to my apartment but to Route 14, where I parked in the lot of the Brightside Diner and waited 2 hours in my car for Monica Shin to arrive. She was younger than I expected, mid-30s, short hair, no makeup, wearing a canvas jacket with a lot of pockets. She slid into the booth across from me and set down a digital recorder, a notebook, and a coffee she'd ordered on the way in. Her eyes were sharp and patient and immediately reminded me of Gerald, that trained attentiveness, that quality of seeing everything while appearing to see nothing. "Earl," she extended her hand. I shook it. Her grip was firm and brief. "Thank you for meeting me. I know this is risky for you." "I don't know what this is yet." She nodded. "Fair. Let me tell you what I know, and then you can decide what you want to tell me." What Monica Shin knew was this. Meridian BioSciences had a public-facing research division that worked on gene therapy and agricultural biotechnology, and a classified division funded by a series of Defense Department contracts dating back 7 years. The classified division occupied the B2 sublevel and was technically a government facility operating inside a private building. A legal structure designed to keep its work outside the normal oversight channels. She'd confirmed this through FOIA requests, leaked budget documents, and 2 anonymous sources inside the Department of Defense. The research director for the classified division was Dr. Andrus Kemp, a virologist who'd previously worked at USA MRIID, the Army's Medical Research Institute at Fort Detrick, before being quietly transferred to Meridian under a consulting arrangement that didn't appear on any public record. Kemp's area of expertise, based on his published academic work before everything went classified, was the neurological effects of engineered viral agents. He studies viruses that affect the brain, Monica said. Or he did, before he stopped publishing. 7 years ago, right when the Meridian contract started. What does that have to do with Lab 12? That's what I've been trying to find out. My sources tell me Lab 12 is Kemp's primary workspace. It has its own ventilation system, its own power supply, its own decontamination chamber. It's a BSL-4 lab inside a building that's officially rated BSL-2. The company never filed the proper certifications because the lab technically doesn't exist on any public document. She paused, looked at me with those careful eyes. Now, tell me what you saw. I told her. I took the spiral notebook from my bag and read her my entries for Wednesday night and Thursday night. Every detail, every timestamp, every observation. I gave her the shredded paper strips from the executive office wastebasket. She handled them with the tips of her fingers, reading the fragments, and her expression didn't change, but I saw her jaw tighten. Fort Detrick, she said. They're moving it. Moving what? She set the paper strips down carefully. Earl, I think Kemp's team created something in that lab. Something biological, something engineered, something that wasn't supposed to get out. And based on what you saw, the cracked containment, the fluid, whatever was alive in that box, I think it did get out. And now they're not trying to fix it. They're trying to hide it. But if it's dangerous, then hiding it is the most dangerous thing they can do, because you can't decontaminate what you won't acknowledge. She picked up her recorder. I need you to say all of this on the record. Names, dates, everything. I'm going to file this story in the next 24 hours, and I need a source who can be identified. Anonymous tips aren't enough for something this big. My name, my face, my voice attached to accusations against a Defense Department contractor about a classified lab I wasn't supposed to have entered. If I do this, I'll never work again. Maybe not at Meridian. I mean anywhere, you understand that? I'm a janitor. I clean buildings. If I become the guy who leaked classified information, no company in the country will hire me to touch a mop. She didn't argue. She didn't minimize it. She looked at me across the table with an expression that was not sympathetic, not cold, but honest. You're right. That might happen. I won't tell you it won't. And if I don't do this, then I keep investigating, and maybe I find another way in. Or maybe I don't. And whatever's in Lab 12 gets moved to Fort Detrick, and the breach gets classified. And if something was released, nobody knows until it's too late to matter. I looked at the recorder. Black plastic, a small red light waiting to be activated. I thought about Claire in Portland, learning to make fresh pasta, happy in her small and careful life. I thought about my apartment, my routine, my paycheck, the narrow but sufficient structure of my existence. I thought about the fluid on the table, moving with purpose, searching for the edge. I picked up the recorder and pressed the button myself. I went home after the diner and slept for 6 hours, the best sleep I'd had since Wednesday, which didn't make sense. I'd just placed a bomb under my own life. But there was a clarity in having decided. The suspense was over. The thing I was afraid of was no longer a possibility. It was a certainty, and certainties, even terrible ones, are easier to live inside than unknowns. I woke at 4 p.m. to 7 missed calls, 3 from Dennis's cell phone, which surprised me because Dennis never called more than once. 2 from a number with Meridian's corporate prefix, 1 from Gerald, and 1 from a number I didn't recognize with a 301 area code, Maryland. I didn't return any of them. Instead, I called Claire. She picked up mid-laugh, talking to Marcus about something in the background, and her happiness hit me like a wave of warm water. I told her I loved her. She said she loved me too, in that slightly puzzled tone children use when a parent says something true but unexpected. I told her that if she heard anything about me in the news, she should know that I did what I thought was right. She went quiet. Dad, what are you talking about? Probably nothing. I'm probably being dramatic. Just remember that I said it. You're scaring me. Don't be scared. I'm fine. Go make pasta. I hung up before she could press harder. Then I got dressed for work. I know, but I needed one more night. Not to investigate, not to find more evidence, not for any strategic reason. I needed to go back because that building had been my life for 11 years. And if this was the last time, I wanted to walk through it knowing what I knew, seeing it clearly, understanding what I'd been cleaning around all those years without recognizing it. The drive to Meridian was 22 minutes. I took the highway, same as always, past the strip malls and the fast food joints and the self-storage places and the car dealerships. The ordinary American landscape that would look exactly like this tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Except maybe it wouldn't, because Monica Shin had told me she was filing her story tonight, Saturday night, for publication Sunday morning. And once it was out there, everything I was driving past would still exist. But it would exist in a different world. One where people knew what Meridian had been doing in its basement. I pulled into the east lot at 9:45 p.m. and saw the problem immediately. The lot was full, not just the 7 or 8 extra cars from the night before, fully occupied. 30 or 40 vehicles, including 3 more unmarked white vans and 2 black SUVs with tinted windows. The building's exterior lights were all on, every floor blazing, and there were people moving behind the glass on the 4th floor, silhouettes, purposeful, carrying boxes and equipment. They were evacuating. I sat in my car for 5 minutes watching. Teams of people moved between the building and the vans, loading cases and containers with the organized efficiency of a rehearsed operation. Some wore lab coats, some wore suits, 2 wore military uniforms. No one was panicking. No one was rushing. This was controlled, planned, and fast. Then I saw something that made me grip the steering wheel hard enough to hurt my hands. A team of 4 people came out the service entrance wheeling a large steel container on a flatbed dolly. The container was sealed, maybe 4 feet tall, cylindrical, with hazard markings I could see even from across the parking lot, the Biohazard trefoil, bright orange against the steel. They loaded it into the back of a van. The van's interior was lined with something I could see it through the open doors. A white material, insulation or containment padding. They closed the doors and the van pulled out of the lot, heading east toward the highway, toward Maryland. I got out of my car and walked toward the building. I was halfway across the lot when Gerald intercepted me. He appeared from the side entrance, moving fast, and he put his hand on my arm, not roughly, but firmly. Earl, go home. It's my shift. Your shift's been canceled. All custodial is suspended until further notice. Dennis was supposed to call you. He did. I didn't pick up. Gerald looked at the building, then at me, then at the building again. He was deciding something. I could see the gears working behind his trained, neutral face. Earl, I've known you 11 years. You're a good man. You do your job and you don't cause trouble. So I'm going to say this once, and I need you to hear it. I'm listening. Go home. Go to your daughter. Go anywhere that isn't here. Don't come back to this building, and if anyone calls you from a number you don't recognize, don't answer. Do you understand? Gerald, what's happening in there? His hand was still on my arm. He squeezed once, brief and hard, the most physical contact we'd ever had. Something got out, he said, Wednesday night. Something got out, and they can't put it back, and everything you're watching right now is them trying to pretend that's not true. I drove home. I didn't go inside. I sat in my car in the apartment complex parking lot and watched the Walgreens across the street, where a woman was picking up a prescription and a man was buying a case of beer. And I held the knowledge of what Gerald had said like a burning coal in my hands. Something got out. Wednesday night. The night I'd been in Lab 12. The night that containment unit was cracked and the fluid was on the table and the thing inside the box shifted when I stepped closer. Something had already escaped, and I had stood in the room with it, breathed the air, touched the door handle, walked through the corridor and up the stairs and through the building and out to my car and home. I looked at my hands. I touched my face. I waited to feel something, a symptom, a change, an alteration. Nothing. I felt normal. I felt like myself. But what did that mean when I didn't know what the agent was, what it did, how it transmitted, how long it incubated? I called Ray. He answered immediately. "Earl, where are you?" "Home. Listen, Gerald, the security guard, told me something got out on Wednesday. The night I was in the lab. The night the containment was breached. I was in the room, Ray. I breathed the air." Silence. Then, "Are you symptomatic?" "I don't know. What would the symptoms be?" "I don't know either. I told you I was Lab 9, different project. But Earl, if you were exposed to a BSL-4 agent, you need medical attention. You need to go to a hospital. And tell them what? That I was exposed to a classified pathogen in a lab that doesn't officially exist? Tell them you're feeling ill and you work at a biotech facility. Let them run blood work. They won't know what to look for, but at least you'll be in a medical setting if something... Ray, they're evacuating the building. I watched them load a containment vessel into a van heading east. They're moving it to Fort Detrick, just like the document said. And Monica's story goes live tomorrow morning. I know. She called me an hour ago to verify some details. Earl, the story is going to name you. Are you prepared for that? I wasn't. I wasn't prepared for any of this. I was a janitor who'd walked down the wrong staircase on the wrong night, and every decision since then had been the kind of decision I'd spent my whole life avoiding, the kind with consequences that can't be mopped up. There's something else, Ray said. Something Monica told me that she didn't want to tell you in the diner because she didn't want to scare you before you agreed to go on record. Tell me. Her sources at DoD said Kemp's project was terminated 3 months ago, officially shut down. The funding was pulled and the materials were supposed to have been destroyed in July. So Lab 12 should have been empty since July. Whatever you saw in that containment unit on Wednesday night wasn't supposed to exist. The implications unfolded in my mind like a paper map being shaken open. Kemp's project had been shut down. The lab should have been cleaned out. But someone, Kemp himself or someone on his team, had kept working, kept the specimens alive, kept the research going in a lab that was officially decommissioned, in a building where the only people present at night were a janitor, a security guard, and a supervisor who watched basketball on his phone. They'd used the darkness. The same darkness I worked in, the same empty hallways I cleaned, the same silent overnight hours that had been my world for 11 years. They'd used my invisibility as their cover. I felt something then that I hadn't felt before. Not in the lab, not in the diner, not talking to Monica or Gerald. I felt anger. Not fear, not confusion, not the helpless uncertainty of a small man caught in large machinery. Anger, pure and clean and clarifying. They had used the building I maintained. They had used the hours I worked. They had used my insignificance as a shield for whatever they were doing, and whatever they'd created had gotten out while I was standing 5 feet from it with a mop. I picked up my notebook. I opened it to the last page I'd written on my entry from Thursday night. The cart with the tarp, the man in the lab coat's calculating smile. Below it, I wrote, Saturday, October 12th, Gerald confirmed breach. Wednesday night, I was exposed. The project was supposed to be terminated in July. Someone kept it going in the dark. Monica's story publishes tomorrow morning. If anything happens to me, this notebook is the record. My name is Earl Potts. I was the night janitor. I was there. I didn't sleep Saturday night. I sat in my apartment with the lights on and the television cycling through channels and my phone on the table in front of me, and I waited. At 2 a.m., my phone rang. The Maryland number again, 301 area code. I didn't answer. It rang again at 2:15, again at 2:30. At 2:45, a different number called, a local one this time. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from a man with a calm, professional voice who identified himself as Thomas Breck, Director of Security Operations for Meridian BioSciences, and who said he needed to speak with me urgently regarding a personnel matter and that it was in my best interest to return his call as soon as possible. I played the message 3 times. Personnel matter. Best interest, the language of institutional power folding its hands around something small. Around me. At 4 a.m., a car pulled into the apartment complex parking lot. A black sedan, not an SUV, but the same kind of anonymously expensive vehicle I'd seen at Meridian. It parked across the lot, engine running, headlights off. I watched it from my window. It sat there for 40 minutes. Then it drove away. I was not imagining this. I want that to be clear. I was not paranoid, not sleep-deprived into hallucination, not interpreting ordinary events through a lens of fear. A car sat in my parking lot for 40 minutes in the dead of night, the same week I'd reported a biosafety breach to a journalist. This was real. At 5 a.m., I put on my shoes and my jacket. I took my notebook and put it in the inside pocket. I took the shredded paper strips. I'd kept copies. I'd photographed them and sent the photos to Monica and to a new email address I'd created just for this purpose, with a timed message set to forward to Claire if I didn't log in within 72 hours. These were not the actions of a man who knew what he was doing. These were the actions of a man who'd watched enough movies to know that evidence should be distributed and preserved, and who was making it up as he went along. I left the apartment at 5:15 and drove north, toward the Brightside Diner, because it was the only place outside my routine that felt like it belonged to this new version of my life. I ordered coffee and eggs and sat in the same back booth where I'd met Monica and waited for 6 a.m. when her story was scheduled to publish. At 6:04, my phone buzzed. A text from Monica. It's live. I opened the link. The headline read, Classified bioweapons research continued at Maryland facility months after federal order to terminate containment breach reported by facility worker. My name was in the third paragraph. I read the whole article. Monica had done extraordinary work. She'd combined my account with documents from her DoD sources, Ray's background testimony, and public records about Meridian's contracts to build a picture that was devastating and precise. The article described Dr. Andres Kemp's research into neurotropic viral agents viruses engineered to cross the blood-brain barrier and alter neural function. It described the July termination order and the evidence that work had continued in secret. It described the containment breach I'd witnessed and the subsequent evacuation of materials. What it didn't describe, because Monica didn't know, and neither did I, was what the agent did. What it would do when it reached a living human host. What was already happening, perhaps, in the air ducts and drainage systems of a building I'd cleaned for 11 years, seeping outward into the Maryland morning. My phone rang. Claire. Dad, I just saw there's an article. Your name is... I know, sweetheart. What did you do? The question was so simple. What did I do? I found something. I told someone. I wrote it down. These were not heroic acts. These were the minimum actions of a conscious person, and they had taken me 3 days to perform, 3 days of hesitation, 3 days of wanting to look away, 3 days of fighting 11 years of institutional training that had taught me thoroughly and effectively that my job was to clean up after other people's work without ever asking what the work was. I found something at work, I said. Something dangerous. I reported it. Are you safe? I looked out the diner window. The parking lot was empty except for my car and the cook's pickup truck, and at the far edge, a black sedan. Same model, same tinted windows, engine running. I'm at a diner, I said. I'm eating breakfast. Dad, Claire, I need you to do something. In your email, there's a message from an address you won't recognize. It has attachments, photos, notes, a copy of my logbook entries. If anything happens and you don't hear from me, forward everything to Monica Shin. Her contact info is in the email. Can you do that? She was crying. I could hear it, not sobs, just that quiet catch in the breathing that I'd known since she was 3 years old and trying to be brave about a scraped knee. Dad, please come to Portland. Maybe. Soon. I love you. I hung up. The sedan was still there. I finished my coffee, left cash on the table, and walked out to the parking lot. The morning was cool and gray, October in Maryland, and the air smelled like coffee and asphalt, and the distant hint of something I might have been imagining, metal and ozone and sweetness, carried on a wind I couldn't feel. I drove to the Meridian building. I don't know why. I've asked myself 1,000 times, and the answer keeps changing. Maybe I needed to see it one more time. Maybe I thought there was something else I could find. Some final piece that would make everything make sense. Maybe I was simply drawn back to the place where my life had cracked open, the way you can't stop pressing on a bruise. The parking lot was empty, completely empty. No cars, no vans, no SUVs. The building looked the same as it always had from the outside. 4 stories of corporate beige, glass, and steel, the Meridian BioSciences logo above the main entrance in silver letters. But the energy was gone. Buildings have energy when they're occupied, a hum you feel more than hear. The collective vibration of computers and climate systems and human bodies generating heat and movement. This building was inert, dead. The side entrance where I always clocked in was locked. My badge produced no response at all. Not a red beep, not a green beep, nothing. The reader was off. I walked around to the main entrance, locked. I cupped my hands against the glass and looked into the lobby. The waterfall feature was still running. The reception desk was clean, but the lights were off on every floor above, and the elevator indicator above the doors showed both cars stopped on B2. I walked the perimeter of the building. At the loading dock in the back, the roll-up door was closed, but not latched. It had been pulled down in a hurry, and the bottom edge sat an inch above the concrete, leaving a gap I could see through if I got on my hands and knees. I got on my hands and knees. The loading area was empty except for one thing. A steel containment box, about 3 feet long, sitting on the concrete floor, unconnected to anything. It looked like the unit I'd seen in Lab 12. Same size, same shape, same clamps. But this one was intact. No cracks. Whatever was inside, if anything was inside, was sealed. Except it wasn't. As I watched through the gap, a thin line of dark fluid appeared at the base of the container. Not a drip, not a spill. A slow, deliberate extrusion pushing out through a seam that should have been airtight. It reached the concrete and began to spread, not in a circle like a normal liquid, but in a line. Toward the gap, toward me. I stood up and backed away from the loading dock. My heart was doing something it had never done before, not fast, not pounding, but irregular, stumbling over itself like a man tripping on stairs. I got in my car and drove. I was on Route 14, heading east without a destination, when the first ambulance passed me going west. Then a second, then a third. I turned on the radio. The local news station was running a story about a disturbance at St. Agnes Hospital, 6 miles from the Meridian facility. Multiple patients presenting with acute neurological symptoms, combative behavior, 3 staff members injured. I pulled over. I sat on the shoulder of the road and listened to the radio and watched the ambulances stream past, and I felt the world I knew, the ordinary, boring, beautiful world of Walgreens parking lots and Sunday phone calls and fresh pasta and hot sauce on chicken thighs begin to close like an eye. It was out. It had been out since Wednesday, maybe longer, moving through the air and the water and the soil around a building I'd cleaned every night without knowing what I was cleaning around. 3 days. 3 days of it spreading silently while Meridian evacuated their evidence, and the Defense Department made phone calls, and a janitor wrote notes in a spiral notebook because nobody would listen. I picked up my phone and called Monica. "Earl, are you watching the news?" "I'm listening to it. St. Agnes has 37 patients in the last 2 hours, all from the same zip code, all within a 3-mile radius of Meridian." "Earl, this is it. This is the breach going public." "I know. I need you to get somewhere safe. The story is getting traction. CNN picked it up. The AP is running it. People are going to be looking for you. Meridian's people, government people. You need to disappear for a few days." "Monica, I was in the lab. Wednesday night, I was exposed." She was quiet. In the background, I could hear her typing, other voices, a television playing, the sounds of a newsroom mobilizing. "Have you had any symptoms?" "No." "Then maybe you weren't infected. Maybe the agent needs a different vector. Maybe you were lucky, but you need to get to a hospital and get tested, and you need to do it now before the hospitals fill up." She was right. I knew she was right. But I didn't drive to a hospital. I drove to my apartment, and I went inside, and I sat down at my kitchen table with my notebook, and I wrote everything. Everything from that morning, the sedan, the diner, the empty building, the containment box on the loading dock. The fluid moving toward me. The ambulance's saint. Agnes, Monica's call. I wrote it clearly and carefully, the way I'd cleaned floors for 11 years methodically, thoroughly, leaving no corner untouched. By noon, the governor declared a state of emergency. I watched it on television from my kitchen table. The notebook open beside me, the pen still in my hand. The press conference was held in the state capitol, and the governor stood behind a podium flanked by officials from the CDC and the Maryland Department of Health. And he used words like containment and precautionary measures and no cause for widespread alarm. And every word was a lie so transparent it glowed. Behind him on the screen they used for visual aids, there was a map showing the affected area. A red circle centered on Meridian BioSciences, expanding outward in concentric rings. The innermost ring, ground zero, the immediate vicinity, was labeled quarantine zone. My apartment was outside it, barely, by maybe 2 miles. The phone rang. Claire. Dad, please, get in your car and drive to Portland, right now. The highways are going to be a mess, sweetheart. Then take back roads. Just come, please. I need to do something first. What could you possibly need to do? I looked at the notebook, 53 pages of a janitor's handwriting, documenting everything from Wednesday night to this moment. Times, dates, names, observations, the smell, the sound, the fluid on the table, Dennis's dismissal, Sharon's message, Gerald's warning, Ray's terror, Monica's precision, the corporate cleanup, the military transport, the shredded documents, the sealed corridors, the server room's sudden restriction, everything. I need to make sure this gets to the right people, I said. All of it. Every page. Monica has it. You sent her the photos. Photos aren't the same. The original matters. And there are things I've written today that I haven't sent yet. I could hear her breathing. Could hear Marcus in the background, quiet, listening. Could hear the television in their Portland apartment playing the same press conference I was watching. The world was learning what I'd known for 3 days, and the 3-day head start hadn't been enough to save anyone. Dad, 1 hour. Get in the car in 1 hour. 1 hour, I hung up. I photographed every page of the notebook, all 53, and uploaded them to 3 separate cloud accounts. I emailed the full set to Monica, to Ray, to Claire, and to the new anonymous email I created. I sent copies to 2 journalists whose names I'd found in Monica's article as colleagues. I sent copies to the CDC's public tip line. I sent copies to the Washington Post's general submissions inbox. I sent copies everywhere I could think of because I'd learned in 3 days what it took most people a lifetime to understand. Institutions protect themselves, and the only defense against institutional silence is redundancy. Say it once and they can silence you. Say it 100 times from 100 directions, and someone will hear it. At 12:45 p.m., I sealed the physical notebook in a plastic bag and mailed it to Claire's address in Portland from the mailbox at the corner of my street. I used priority mail. I wrote fragile on the envelope, and then below it, important, please do not discard. Then I walked back to my apartment and packed a bag. 3 changes of clothes, toothbrush, phone charger, the hot sauce from the kitchen counter, because it was the only thing in the apartment that felt like mine. At 1 p.m., I got in my car. The streets were busier than usual for a Sunday. People had seen the press conference, and the instinct was already kicking in, the ancient human impulse to move away from danger. Traffic on Route 14 was heavy heading north. I merged in and crawled along at 20 miles an hour, surrounded by families in loaded minivans and couples in sedans with luggage piled in the back seat. The radio was continuous coverage now. St. Agnes was overwhelmed. 2 other hospitals in the area were reporting similar cases. The word outbreak appeared for the first time at 1:22 p.m. I noted it because I was still noting everything, still writing in my head even without the notebook, still doing the only thing I knew how to do, which was observe and record. The first military checkpoint appeared at the Route 14 interchange. National Guard, Humvees, concrete barriers across 2 of the 4 lanes. They were checking IDs and asking about symptoms. I waited in line for 30 minutes. When I reached the checkpoint, a guardsman who looked young enough to be Claire's classmate glanced at my license and waved me through. I drove north. Behind me, In the rearview mirror, the skyline of the city I'd lived in for 11 years receded into a gray October haze. Somewhere in that haze, Meridian BioSciences sat dark and empty, its halls unmopped, its surfaces unwiped, its secrets leaking through a gap in a loading dock door and into the soil and the air and the water table and the bloodstreams of everyone who'd lived near it, and trusted that the boring beige building with the waterfall feature in the lobby was just another office building doing ordinary work. I was 3 hours from Portland, driving through Pennsylvania, when the first reports came of cases outside the quarantine zone. The notebook arrived at Claire's apartment on a Tuesday. She opened it at the kitchen table while Marcus made coffee, and she read every page, and then she sat very still for a long time. I was there. I'd made it to Portland on Sunday night, driving through increasingly chaotic highways, and I'd walked into her apartment, and she'd held me without speaking. Just held me, the way I used to hold her when she was small, and something was too big and too terrible to explain. I'm writing this from her living room. The television is on, it's always on now, and the numbers are climbing in the way that numbers climb when something exponential begins, and the people in charge spent the critical first days protecting their secrets instead of protecting their people. 3 days. I had 3 days, and all I could do with them was write things down and hope someone would read them. Monica's article has been cited by every major outlet. The congressional investigation has started. Meridian's board has been subpoenaed. Dr. Kemp is missing. Gerald is missing. Dennis never answered his phone again. The test results from a Portland hospital say I'm clean. No infection, no antibodies, no markers. The doctors can't explain it. Maybe the agent needed a vector I didn't encounter. Maybe the exposure time was too short. Maybe I was just lucky in the same blind, stupid, unremarkable way I'd been unlucky enough to walk down those stairs on a Wednesday night. I don't have the notebook anymore. Claire sent it to Monica, who sent it to the Congressional Committee, where it sits in evidence as Item 7C, the handwritten record of a night janitor who saw something in Lab 12 and did the only thing he knew how to do. He wrote it down.